Alright, YouTube, I'm about 2/3 of the way through a new booklet. It'll be the last booklet for March. I was going to do two more, but I wanted to focus on the one that I'm writing now and make it a little bit more in-depth. So it's getting on towards completion. Within a couple days, I'll probably be doing sort of the final edit and the cover art and so forth. It's getting near done. On the topic of robotics, and specifically the coming robotic epoch, if we look at the world today, we're beginning to leave the Anthropocene behind. We're beginning to build a world in which we're essentially creating a new layer of life forms as sort of servants for ourselves in the robotic sense. We see this with drones. We see this with sort of the driverless car stuff, AI, the internet in general, and automation. And my general theory is that if extraterrestrials exist at all, I mean sophisticated extraterrestrials, they've followed a path of development that's roughly akin to what humans have followed. That is, with each successive step in man's cognition and behavior, new epochs rise up. It then moves to technology. Certain technologies have to be made in order for additional epochs to be promulgated. For instance, man in the pre-hominid sense was little more than basically the same as a chimpanzee, sort of an ape-like ancestor that evolution talks about. Some people say, oh, we didn't evolve from them monkeys. Nobody said that. We all sort of evolved from the same very primitive ape-like ancestor. Those early hominids didn't really have any significant distinguishing characteristics other than they happened to be diverged from that same sort of ape lineage. They could have interbred with those individuals if they had wanted to. Behaviorally, apparently they were different. The grasslands hypothesis has been somewhat falling out of favor lately in favor of the patchy forest hypothesis. That is, that our ancestors inhabited some lightly forested coastal regions actually first, rather than this massive sort of steppe or Saharan wasteland in the middle of Africa. And what happens is that the first few advances made there are made passively by mimicry. It's through the innate process of mimicry. Essentially, one ape-like ancestor picks up a rock, bashes some enemy over the head, another hominid, something attacking them, like a saber-toothed tiger or something. I know that wouldn't be in Africa, but you get what I mean. Or maybe prey in order to consume the corpse once it's dead. Or consume it alive. Who knows what they were into. Some weird stuff in the human lineage. And others took this up through mimicry. At some point, some individual there with a slightly larger, dim awareness of the world around them realized that certain rocks, shaped in different ways, did different things. It could have been the result of self-injury. They picked up a sharp rock and then realized, oh, I injured myself. Whoa, what'll this do to something else that I hit it with? And they kill another member of their tribe. Again, they kill prey or whatever. And pretty soon, it is realized, again, over the course of it probably took hundreds of thousands of years for any specific sort of primitive hominid tribe to begin replicating the behavior. They developed the hand axe because they realized, number one, rocks shaped a certain way work better than others. Number two, it's possible to simply take a rock, smash it on another rock, and sometimes it comes out looking about like that. They then, in the later periods, begin refining this and deliberately grinding them into that shape because they realize that it's a good shape. But ultimately, in order for later epochs to arise, we're talking like Copper Age culture, stuff like that, there has to be an externalization of the concept of ambition, an externalization of the concept of cause and effect, not necessarily direct experimentation for experimentation's sake, but the idea that you can improve upon things around you for various purposes has to be externalized. Therefore, it has to be communicated. There had to be an intellectual awareness, and there had to be the ability to communicate that awareness to others. Without that, it would have been impossible for us to ever leave the Stone Age. And so they did. That was developed again. In that early period, things are the result of dumb chance and mimicry. It took hundreds of thousands of years for that next epoch then to arise. Once, though, they had that ability, they could more intelligently change themselves in a behavioral sense through will, because they then understood cause and effect, and on more than the very, very primitive level. Early hominids, they would have said, for example, we saw big spark in sky, fire is caused. When I hit this rock against another rock, little sparks. Oh, maybe I can make little fire. And so cause and effect was dimly recognized at the time. Of course, later they begin improving upon this because they realize there are other ways to kindle that fire. They realize through dumb experimentation, essentially, more passive experimentation, they can sort of determine which foods are edible or inedible, how to raise, in a horticultural sense, not a true agricultural sense, crops and so forth, how to properly feed the dogs that were following them around, such that domestication began to occur. They began to develop the rudiments of architecture, the lintel, and so forth. And then as these epochs move along, I believe that we're near the end of the fourth epoch of human culture. The first is the primitive, the animalistic. The second is the archaic. That's when you get sort of the Copper Age stuff, the late Paleolithic advances. Man is more now than an animal because behavior has changed, but it's all cultural. The mind hadn't changed that much. It was the use of the mind through cause and effect, through ambition, through an extension of human competition, which drove then human advancements over that period of time. The third is antiquity. Now, mostly when we say antiquity, we're talking about, like, some of the empires. We're talking about ancient Athens or the Roman Empire or Egypt or something like that. I believe that stems up through essentially until the industrial era. Essentially, antiquity, that basic behavioral and language-based epoch with all of its advances is pretty mundane and doesn't really go exponential until the middle of the 1800s and somewhat thereafter with the rise of the first true electronics. We're talking about the telegraph and things like that. That's the point. With semi-automation, we're talking about the cotton gin and so forth, at which much more substantial mechanical apparatuses begin to truly overhaul the way in which we live our lives. That then lasts until now. And in the modern era, we have increasingly the externalization in an electronic form of our communication. The development of communication and behavior has become much more important than the development of biology alone. Biology alone can take you to the archaic stage. It can give you those basic advances through very long spans of time and through trial and error that is not consciously being conducted, through mimicry. Essentially, one member of a tribe observing something, mimicking it, and if it's simple enough, it can give you simple technologies because you can't mimic something more complex because you're basically still a very ape-like hominid. Later on, it becomes behavioral. In the archaic stage, it's all behavioral. Once you're moving to antiquity, it's really the rise of language that's doing it. Because then you can communicate ideas, you can communicate technologies, draw them out, and show others what you're talking about without directly having to go through the entire process physically. Before, in order to teach someone how to make the hand axe, you made the hand axe they observed and mimicked. There was no guarantee they did it properly. You couldn't transmit that idea externally to yourself. You would have to show them. Now, all of a sudden, you could write down instructions on a clay tablet or a piece of paper, and many, many people could draw communication from that if they understood the language. That's where antiquity truly comes in. It's human communication. The fourth epoch is the automation of all of this stuff. The automation of language. Now it's all electronic. The fifth that's going to arise, and I see extraterrestrials as likely going through those successive steps more or less. Some developed earlier, some will develop later, some probably destroy themselves. I speak about that at length in this work. What's happening is that we're further automating the world around us. The next epoch will be we've created robots that are essentially sentient beings but still reliant upon us for maintenance. That is, we can fully automate the world around us. The only reason that we're even necessary for it to continue to function is to supply fuel, to oversee the supplying of energy in some form, to maintain mechanical systems that haven't yet gained the ability to do so themselves, to replicate these systems. It becomes a mutualistic relationship between a life form that itself cannot replicate or maintain itself, and one that increasingly, and that's man, will not be able to survive without those creations that it's made. It will be a mutualistic arrangement. The final, presumably, epoch, before a totally new life form emerges, which will be some sort of robotic life, some sort of AI system, in a centralized or decentralized, or it might be literally a colonial system like an anthill, where there's one sort of supermind controlling everything else through a sensory apparatus, or they may be discrete individuals. It doesn't really make a difference. It's the same basic concept. They will be able to replicate themselves. Robots will create robots, essentially. Humans will become increasingly, I think, androids at that point. We'll have no choice. Otherwise, we fall into total decadence. We're no longer even necessary. We'll have created a life form that is our superior, because the one thing that kept it on an even basis was that it required us to maintain it. But humans will improve upon that during the fifth epoch. It probably won't even take half a century to go all the way through that. Each epoch as well, this is an important statement, because dumb biology alone advances things very slowly. It's more stable, but it advances things easily. I mean, very slowly. So it takes, millions of years to get to the next stage. That archaic period takes, 10,000, 20,000 years to culminate. The next stage lasts a few thousand. The modern stage has been around for less than 2 centuries. The next stage, I predict, will be an even shorter period of time. We can see throughout history, if we're breaking things up according to these basic core categories and the advancements that come as the result of them, each step takes a smaller amount of time. It'll probably take half a century, maybe a century tops, for the fifth epoch to cap itself off, leading to the rise of a totally new synthetic life form. Now, does that mean that we should consider it to be just a robot, sort of a plaything? No, it's a new form of life. It's just one that happens to have arisen synthetically. It's one that was created by another life form. It makes us gods, essentially. Oh, it gets into some Paradise Lost sort of bullshit right there. And it will happen. It's within our grasp. We simply have to develop greater efficiency. And there's also one other strange thing with robotics. We've developed it, the mind first. But with dumb biology, the mind is second. You have billions of years of evolution without a substantial change in the neural interface sort of used by our direct lineage. For very long periods of time, the mental capability remains roughly the same, even up through that primitive through archaic period. The human mind doesn't really change that much. Our mind is not that different from many of these sort of earlier groups from hundreds of thousands of years ago. There's not a huge difference. The difference is behavioral. The difference is in communication and so forth. So the mind remains the same. We're advancing robotics and so forth first from the mind, through processing power, through computing, literally, which should be seen as an offshoot, semi-organic sort of process. And now we're beginning to develop, oh, well, that's right. No, we've got the computing ability to do this, but we need to make it compact. We need to make it mobile. We need to figure out how to make it more fuel efficient, more energy efficient. Otherwise, it's kind of pointless. Because otherwise, all you have is literally sort of a brain-in-a-box situation where you've got some advanced AI that doesn't actually have the ability to do anything outside of electronic circuits or something like that. Now, there's also the possibility that this fifth epoch will bring our world crashing down around us. We could become quite decadent and reliant, and then a disaster hits, and all of these advances are wiped out. And because we no longer do the farming ourselves, because we no longer build our own homes or anything like that, we have to regress to older technology. And many people that are fully reliant, they won't make it. They'll just die off. It's possible we get hit by a disaster that drives us to extinction. We could get hit by an epidemic because of density or something like that. There are all sorts of weird paradoxical situations as well to explain why we don't see space aliens around us floating around the sky. Because if there is the potential for beings that are millions of years more advanced, you'd think by now they'd be at least interstellar. There should be some in our neighborhood, statistically speaking. They should be, somewhat evident. I would say it could be a case of they avoid us. Could be a case of we're totally boring. They don't want to come here because why would you waste your time? There's nothing here of value. They could be looking at us. They could have cloaking devices. Maybe they observe us like this is a zoo. Like they're literally watching me make this video right now, like, oh, look at this interesting hominid here, theorizing on our existence or something like that. I'm sure they would find Ancient Aliens extremely entertaining. Probably be like, it'd be the top comedy on Planet X or something like that. But it's an interesting field to think about. I get a little bit into robotic ethics, sort of exopolitics, things of that nature. So if you're into that sort of stuff, you're going to love this booklet. And it will be done by the end of March. But I just thought I'd give people an update, sort of the general notion of what I'm actually talking about here. It goes into evolution. Evolution is key. Evolution is prime in everything. Everything evolves. All human systems evolve. Our computers are evolving. Intelligently, we're causing them to evolve over time. Language evolves. Culture evolves. Behavior evolves. Statehood evolves. Everything does. It all acts in accordance with natural selection in a somewhat complicated manner. We have to simplify it to really categorize it. It's a little more complex than that. But it does follow, because it's an extension of man. Our behaviors are an extension of our biology. Our states, everything is an extension of our biological faculties. It all evolves alongside with us, except at a much greater rate than our biology evolves. That requires sexual selection and things of that nature. That's about all. Peace out.